Welcome back to the podcast. In today's show, I asked the question, what if your company were Gorilla Green? Gorilla Green. Most of us know a lot or have heard of or aware of green movements, particularly as it relates to certain companies. With those companies, they may change out light bulbs, they may put in motion detector switches that will turn lights on and off. They may even install solar panels to cut energy costs. But when I ask the question, what if your company went Gorilla Green? What I'm implying with that is, what if you built your company to be sustainable from day one? So that everything that you use to manufacture your product started out with a sustainable model. And then you have an accountability model linked to that required you to think about the post-use and disposal of that product when it reached end of life. What if the world operated that way? What if cell phone manufacturers built a business model on recapturing those cell phones and reusing those components in future cell phones? Not just because it's good for the environment, but also because it could produce more profits. Why am I asking that question? Because for as long as I can remember, the US has had enough land to treat as that closet in your house that nobody wants to open the door to. We can just throw stuff in landfills and forget about them because there weren't enough people in crowded situations to be forced to live near those dumps where they would feel the effects of those agents, chemicals, and junk left over from old electronics, old appliances, tires, and other discarded material. Well, that time is changing. Charles Fishman, in his book, The Walmart Effect, says, we consumers used to buy a small quart of elastic pickles for $2.49. Now we're buying gallon-sized jars, and we just simply throw out all the pickles we don't eat. The Walmart effect made it so that we could get a gallon-sized jar of pickles for the same price as the quart, even though we had no intention of consuming the additional pickles. If we drill down further, we find that in 1982, the average cost of a floor model television ranged between $1,000 and $1,400. 6% of a person's annual salary in 1982. By the year 2000, the average 26 floor model dropped to below $600, or 1% of an individual's annual salary. And by 2008, a 30-inch TV had dropped below $200. At that point, the TV became disposable. And according to the EPA, in 2008, 1.84 million tons of televisions and computer products were dumped in landfills. So as the cost of the items that we use in our homes have dropped, so have the disposable waste in our landfills. And unfortunately, that waste is also toxic. According to the EPA, 50 million cell phones are replaced worldwide each month, and only 10% are recycled. One cell phone has enough toxins, arsenic, mercury, and lead to contaminate 40,000 gallons of water. and we are contaminating an estimated 22 trillion gallons of water per year. The model of produce and dispose has reached a tipping point where our business models have to consider being Guerrilla Green. The Container Recycling Institute estimates that 36 billion aluminum cans are in landfills and scrap yards, and the value of those cans is $600 million. That value has probably gone up in the last couple of years as aluminum has reached 55 cents a pound at many recycling centers. Using aluminum cans and recycling them to produce new cans cuts air pollution down by 95% as it relates to that process. Not only are you saving money, but you're also reducing the amount of toxic output. 10 to 11 million cans were taken out of service. 10 to 11 million cars were taken out of service each year. 94%, or 10 million, are returned for recycling, and 75% of the vehicle can be recycled. So we have a good opportunity with cars to strip them down and reuse them in the manufacture of cars going forward. In 2005, 4 billion coffee cups were being put in landfills because they were not recyclable. So when we think about our recent trips to Starbucks, we got to realize that if they aren't producing cups that are recyclable, we're filling up landfills with those cups and reducing the amount of usable space for our future generations. 8.5 billion chickens were processed this year. When processed, the chickens leave behind 3 billion pounds of feathers that go into landfills. Now, feathers can be recycled and used in some startling new products that we'll talk about here in this podcast. 1,500 plastic water bottles are consumed every second in the United States. And there's no concerted effort to make the water bottle, those plastic water bottles, part of a manufacturing ecosystem where they're encouraged to be recycled. What if your business was Guerrilla Green? I'm not just saying putting in energy efficient light bulbs and motion detector switches. What if you were Guerrilla Green and challenged every aspect of the business to find a use, a reuse, or recycling opportunity for leftover scrap, and then find a way to encourage the recycling of the end product when it's at end of life? What would a company look like that did that? Well, let's start first with cars, since we've had a lot of success with recycling. Henry Ford, when he launched the company and started with the mass production using an assembly line of the Model T, produced a lot of wood scrap. A lot of wood scrap that was soaked in chemicals that were part of the production process, be it either painting it or preparing it for installation on the assembly line. Instead of discarding the scrap, Henry Ford took that scrap, processed it to remove the chemicals so that those could be reused or resold, and then took the scrap wood and converted it into briquettes and sold that as charcoal. The brand Kingsford is the charcoal brand that was the effort of that circular loop process that Ford initiated from scrap from the assembly line, named after the lawyer who had married into his family that headed up the effort to get the Kingsford brand off the ground. That effort was not only good in terms of reducing the amount of scrap put into landfills, but it generated incremental income that allowed Ford to increase the wages of the men on the assembly line. What else did Ford as a company do that's linked to this heritage? Well, they were one of the early cars to recycle bumpers, to take bumpers off cars in scrap yards and reuse them on new cars coming off the assembly line. Again, saving millions of dollars from not having to extract raw materials from the ground, process, and make new parts. They took the parts that were already there and used them as part of the manufacturing process. So that's what I mean when I say guerrilla green. To examine the workflow and find opportunities for profit that motivates you to generate those profits that you can reinvest into the business, but also have a huge societal impact. And I think this sort of model can be applied to just about any business if you start with Guerrilla Green as part of the business model from day one. For example, what if Henry Ford were the CEO of Coca-Cola when it was founded? Do you think he would have taken the same principle and figured out a way to encourage people to recycle bottles and cans using the network that Coke has to deliver those same products when they are initially sent to the store shelves? I think he could. I think he could have not only done that and made a profit, but also created ancillary businesses as part of that process, as he did with Kingsford. What's one way that he could have done that? Well, what about those vending machines? That's the perfect network for encouraging recycling. What if the vending machines accepted aluminum cans as payment? Yeah. Slide the cans in, the system assesses whether or not it truly is an aluminum can. It crushes it, inserts it into a storage bin, and assigns a value to that aluminum based on current market value. And here's where it could get really cool. In order for you to recycle using that sort of system, you could set up an account that would allow Coke at that point to process your recycled funds digitally into that account. And you could use that to apply that for beverages out of that machine at that moment, or just let it sit into your account. What would that do for Coke? It would start turning them into a financial services company. Because as millions of people created these digital accounts to collect their aluminum recycling funds, Coke would be the holder of that cash and a distributor of those funds back to its machines. When people chose not to buy instantly, now you're sitting on hordes of cash that, like insurance companies, can be invested in some very profitable ventures based on the amount of interest that you could get from holding those funds. So Coke has that opportunity to create a huge recycling infrastructure, a circular loop that could have opened the doors to more sophisticated business operations that brings their consumers closer to them. Imagine a database with millions of your customers who are bringing your product back to you and helping you drive down your operating cost, and then sharing more personal information about themselves in order to get a banking account that they can use at any of your vending machines. That's more than just putting in energy efficient light bulbs. Like Apple, you would have created an ecosystem that generates profits and produces ancillary benefits that include the environment. Can other businesses do this? Yes. What if Ford had run Staples, the office supply company? There are so many different ways that that company could encourage recycling. They're almost hard to limit. Ink cartridges are one that many of you are aware of, and Staples was one of the early innovators as it relates to recharging old cartridges and putting them back on the shelves with the Staples brand. So if you have a Hewlett Packard or you have a Lenovo or any sort of other printer, you would see stapled private label brands for those devices at a cheaper price than was manufactured by the original manufacturer. Sometimes as much as 50% off the brand name cartridges. In 2005, Staples estimated that it generated an incremental $280 million in revenue from the remanufacturing and recharging of those ink cartridges. So you can see if you walk around that Staples aisle, there are so many different ways that they could recycle computers, printers, screens, and you just go down each aisle and there's at least 5 or 6 items that could be recycled through Staples to drive down their operating costs, to give them the opportunity for private label products, and for give them the chance to sell on your behalf these products back into the production flow and reduce pollution. So storefronts like that, if Ford had run them, could he have taken his same philosophy and applied it there? I think so. Now, one of the favorite restaurants that I like to eat at, Ted's Montana Grill. I wanted to bring them in because people will say, well, Mark, what can restaurants do that they aren't already doing? Like recycling their grease, putting in fluorescent lighting, cutting back on the types of plastics that aren't recyclable in the restaurant. Well, I like Ted's Montana Grill because not only does he own the restaurant, he has the hugest herd, or the biggest herd of bison in the country. And what could he do to drive down more of his cost? Well, first, maybe he could use some of those buffalo or bison chips as fuel. Yeah, animal manure. He could use that manure in a biodigester, and with the 50,000 heads that he have of buffalo, could generate about a $5 million annual savings by using the waste from the animals to create electricity. Not a bad process. The scrap that's left over from the creation of the bison meat, Turner could possibly use that to create his own line of beef jerky. And the stores would be a great first channel to deliver that to the consumers. The hides from the animals could be used for all sorts of personal wear, as well as accessories, handbags, wallets. So when you start to break down every piece of waste or scrap that may be part of his process, there are 3, 4, 5 opportunities for generating incremental income that could be reinvested into the business and reducing the footprint, the waste footprint associated with delivering value through his restaurant. We've talked about Apple's ecosystem, but the iTunes and App Store, for our consumers, prior to Apple, no one had created a system so tightly linked that brought so much value. But for a long time, Apple had not taken full advantage of figuring out how to recycle old iPhones. And then a market popped up with smaller players who started buying, repairing, and reselling those iPhones in developing markets. Had Apple jumped on that process from day one, it's estimated that they could have cut their operating expenses by as much as 5% and generated anywhere from $20 to $30 million in incremental revenue by repurposing and reselling older model iPhones into markets, developing markets. But the model of Gorilla Green, full accountability for the end life of your products was never considered at the point the iPhone was launched. How many of you send cards? I know it's a dying thing, but there's still millions of people who send them. There's lots of people who collect them. What if you could recycle those Hallmark cards? In much the same vein as Coca-Cola has vending machines, why couldn't Hallmark dispense and recycle their cards with machines that will be placed in the same spots where they have their retail shelves today? Get a card, take it back in, recycle it, get a 3 cents, 5 cents off of the cost of a new card, and then print that card, your new card, right out of that vending machine. Hallmark would have the same sort of options as Coke would to create a financial services backbone that underlies their business. Not a bad way of thinking about being Gorilla Green. Now, I picked on Starbucks earlier. Starbucks, for many years, the cups were completely landfill material, couldn't be recycled. And the number of cups that fly off their shelves or fly off their countertops every day is just truly remarkable. But what if Starbucks found a way to completely eliminate the waste by coming up with cups that are edible and that also added flavor to the coffee? I know it sounds impossible, but there's a New York-based consultancy that has come up with a line of disposable cups that they call Jellowware. The group is called The Way We See the World, and the Jellowware cups are edible and can hold hot liquids. They are made from an agar-agar gelatin that's derived from algae, and it's used in the main ingredients in desserts. Now, if you were to be able to mass produce that at or near the cost of a coffee cup, Starbucks now has an interesting opportunity to develop a line of Jellowware cups that have different flavors that once you've consumed your coffee, you just eat the cup. And that to me would be the ultimate in creating a sustainable business model. We mentioned chickens and the 3 billion pounds that are of feathers that are generated each year from the processing of those chickens. The feathers are really unique. I know many of you think about chicken feathers and go, sounds like more of an annoyance, but those feathers can transmit an electrical signal twice as fast as chips developed in Silicon Valley. According to Pam Percy, a research scientist in this area, chicken feather chips are cheaper to manufacture and are easier to dispose of than silicon-based chips. And as I mentioned, have a processing speed twice as fast. So why aren't we exploring opportunities to create chicken feather chips? Maybe this may be the reason why those UFOs are always searching out chickens and other farm animals. You can also use chicken feathers to make note paper. The U.S. Department of Agriculture estimates that a year's worth of feathers could replace approximately 25% of the wood pulp used for diapers. 25%. Again, when we're thinking about saving forest and saving the planet, we can create a balance by using feathers to produce paper and diapers as opposed to cutting down trees. It gives us more per pound and saves more of the environment when we think about the opportunities to turn waste into a product. Chicken feathers are truly unique, and I'm not done. The chicken feathers can also be used to make biodegradable cups. Wow, right? So if you could now go back to Starbucks and say, if you don't want the Jellowware, why not use chicken feathers to make your cups and make them truly disposable? Want to get high tech? Maybe get Elon Musk involved with chicken feathers? Maybe we should let him know that carbonized chicken feathers could act as a highly effective hydrogen storage device. Chicken feathers are made of keratin, a protein that forms long, hollow tubes that, when heated, the tubes create a cross-link that strengthens the structure to the point where it can absorb just as much hydrogen as an equal amount of carbon nanotubes. Somebody should pay attention to this, because if chicken feathers have the ability to do all of what I've laid out here, we're really undervaluing those chicken processing plants. What about our favorite fast foods? Now, I mentioned earlier ways that Ted Montana Grill could create opportunities for the cattle that are raised on the farm to produce electricity. And players like McDonald's have led the way in oil to fuel by collecting the grease from its fryers across the corporate stores and many of its franchisees. McDonald's generates more used deep fryer oil than any other on the planet. They have a program where they started recycling that deep fryer oil, and they're making that effort to convert that into biodiesel. 80% of the used cooking oil from 4,000 franchisees in Europe is already being converted into biodiesel. And in the US, they have approximately 50% of the domestic stores participating in the oil to fuel program. And that's quite a few stores when you say 50% for McDonald's. So you do have some industry leaders that we don't necessarily think of as Guerrilla Green that are doing everything right to repurpose their waste and get more value out of it. Companies like Patagonia have been so efficient in reworking their workflow that they have now started consulting to other major companies to help them rethink their supply chains, their manufacturing, their distribution, to try to reduce the footprint, the waste footprint that's associated with it. And theirs is a fascinating story. Theirs started with first looking at their mountain climbing gear, which is some of their most valuable and highest profit product items. And they realized that those items were creating extensive damage to the mountains that people climbed. And that's what got the CEO and founder thinking we need to eliminate that popular product and come up with better equipment that leaves the mountains intact so that future generations can continue to enjoy and explore. That thought led a tripwire effect throughout the company, where he and his team looked at everything they did and tried to see if there were ways for them to reduce their footprint. When they looked at how they sourced their materials for their jackets and shirts and pants, they realized that they were sourcing cotton from suppliers where the amount of water being used to produce the cotton was more than what was being consumed in many cities. And so they began to rethink the design of the products and the use of cotton within their product line. They, by accident, discovered the amount of embalming fluid, which is the basic ingredient used to treat the cotton, the amount that was being put into the jackets when they opened a small store in the New England area and stored boxes of those shirts, and jackets, and pants in the storeroom. When each employee started getting sick, headaches, fevers, they finally narrowed it down to the chemicals that were in the coats. That started them down a path where they were eliminating those toxic chemicals and replacing those. The net effect, it changed the entire way the company operates. There's a terrific book that outlines the thinking, the process, and the pain they went through to create a more balanced company and to become Guerrilla Green. And I advise each of you to take a look at it. I'll have information on that book in the show notes and a link to the book on Amazon. Being green is not just a catchphrase for me. It's a passion that starts first with an assumption of how do you create profits by being sustainable. And if you can do that, there's a motivation to continue to grow your business and protect the planet because you have created a model that rewards you for thinking about the waste that you generate. If we as Guerrillapreneurs can encourage the world to think this way, to operate this way, we can produce a world that's better for future generations that's also benefiting from those profits. I want to thank you for participating in today's podcast. Please follow us on YouTube, follow our podcast on iTunes, on Spreaker, and on Podomatic. As I say with every episode, if you're not breaking something, your company might be the next thing that gets broken. Keep fighting.